Hey guys, it's Samuel here from HowToVQ, and today I'm going to be showing you how you can send emails with the Gmail API. Now this is going to be a two-part series. In the first part, which is this part, I'm going to be showing you how to send emails, and the second part, I'm going to be showing you how to get emails using the Gmail API. Okay, so let's get started. Now I've opened up Visual Studio here, which I find to be the best platform for developing just at the moment. If you want to use something else like PyCharm or the original editor, that's fine as well, but I just find this easier to use. So if you go to the Gmail API link on developers.google.com, I'll leave this link in the description so you can have a little look at it. You can see this quick start guide. Now I recommend copying this just to get used to the API, just to get a bit of an understanding of how the API works. It's really good to look at some of their sample code. So we just click there and it copies it, and we can now paste that here, and you can see I've already made this file called quick start, where I'll paste it in and save it. Right, so we're going to need to set up credentials, and the way you set up credentials is you can see in the quick start guide, turn on the Gmail API, you have to follow this wizard, and it will tell you a bit about how you do that. You basically click here, and it will say, it might take a bit of a while, and say fetching details, etc. And you can create a project and click continue. And this can take anywhere from 30 seconds to sometimes up to 3 or 4 minutes, but it really depends on how good your internet connection is and how fast it will make the project on Google. But it normally takes about 30 seconds for me, so just be aware that it can take a long time, and it normally is showing a little ring here if it is doing something. Now we're going to go to credentials, and you can see it's loaded now, and now we're going to click other UI, and we can click user data because we're going to be using a Google account or a Google user's data rather than our own data. And now we're going to click what credentials do I need, and we're going to enter in API tutorial and click create client ID, and I'm just going to call this API tutorial as well, and click continue. And now you can see it gives us a client ID. Now you can see it gives us a client ID, and we can click download, and it will download this client ID, which we're going to rename client secret in a bit. So let's just open up our file where we're storing all our Python stuff at the moment. I'm just going to drag this here, and I'm going to rename this client underscore secret, and it has to have the .json at the end. You must ensure that you click done, otherwise it won't remember that you've actually ran your project or set up your API key. Okay, now let's run it, and it should, what we're expecting it to do is print out a list of all the labels after we've logged in, of course, and clicked allow, because it opens up a browser window for that, and it should print out, yep, and it prints out a list of all our labels of our inboxes. So that's just a little example there. Okay, so now let's start debunking this and understanding exactly what we're dealing with. But before we do that, let me just say something about Python environments and the packages you need. So as you can see here, there's a load of different packages. Just look through them and make sure you have them installed here. A good one to have installed is the Google-API-Python-client and the API client. These are two I'd recommend that you should install for any sort of programming with Google APIs. Anyway, back to the other stuff. Okay, so we're going to have to make an auth file, an auth module to contain our auth and where we do all the authentication. So let's start by doing that right away. So let's just create a new file here, and you can do that by just clicking here, click add new item, and if you're in Python you can just make a new file, a new Python file. Okay, and I'm going to call this class auth, and I'm going to set up an init method, and we're going to take in our init method self scopes client underscore secret underscore file, which is where we're storing our authentication, and the scopes is to do with permissions, and of course application name, because this is something you have to set up as well in the authentication process. And we'll set these up as global variables as well. So self.scopes equals scopes, and self.client secret file equals the client secret file, and self.application application underscore name equals the application underscore name. So we've set up our class global variables for our class, and now let's create a method called get underscore credentials, and this method is essentially going to run what Google runs in their quick start method. And we're going to include self, and now we're pretty much going to take what they've done in their quick start method. So we're just going to take this, and we're pretty much going to copy this, because we want to use the stuff they've put in their quick start method pretty much. And we can indent that out by pressing tab. Okay, now there's a few things I'm going to change personally. So this home directory, I prefer, rather than having it in my home directory, I prefer having it in my current working directory, or also sometimes called CWD, and that is basically where the Python file is currently running from. So let's call this CWD, and you can replace this with os.get CWD. And we just need to make sure we've got a few things imported. So we're pretty much going to use most of these for the authentication process. So I'm just going to paste those imports there, just so we have all the required imports. Yeah, so CWD is the current working directory, and we're pretty much going to join that here with the credentials path where it makes a directory, because it's going to make a directory where it stores the credentials, so you don't have to log in every single time, which is obviously handy. And I'm going to rename this Python Gmail API tutorial, and you can obviously rename this whatever you want to do. Okay, so now that's pretty much set up the credentials, and we can make a main file just quickly so we can test out our credentials. Do main.py, and in this main file we're going to basically use all the same imports as well, so it's good to have those. And we'll take the method they used in the quick start guide here where they get the labels. So there's a few things we need to use. We need to use most of those in the main method, and we're going to undo the indentation as well. Okay, so first of all we're going to need to import auth, which is our module we just made, and we're going to make an auth instance as well, just to make it a bit neater. auth.auth, and we're going to include scopes, client secret, application name, and we'll copy the ones we used in the quick start, these scopes and application names. We'll copy those from there. Okay. Right, so we have the auth instance, and we want to get credentials, which is basically what's going to allow us to get, well, it's basically going to allow us to authorize it, as you can see here, where it authorizes it. We do auth.get credentials, and it should return the credentials from that class. And obviously this is the old method from the quick start method, so we don't need that. And now you can see this is the basic authentication process right here. So now let's just make a separate method we'll call get underscore labels, where it will just basically print a list of the labels just so we can test it. And I'll just move that just there. And obviously this indentation is on the wrong level for this for loop here. Okay, so now we have it set up in a different method, so we can more easily implement the Google Mail API, the Gmail API. And here it basically authenticates the credentials using an HTTP method. And here it sets up a service, and you can run all sorts of things from that service, and in particular we can even run the get labels section. Okay, so let's just run get labels and see how that goes. And you can see we have an error because we've not remembered to correctly enter in all our class variables in replace. Basically, we have to reference all the class variables from what their actual name is. And I thought I'd leave that little mistake in there just so you guys could learn to remember these sort of things, because it's small problems like this that can make code harder, harder to find errors. Okay, now let's just check that's all of them. You can just double click in Visual Studio to see if any of them are still, so they're all referenced. You can see any of the other variables also highlighted up when you select the same text, which is very useful. Okay, so let's run that. And it'll ask us to sign in. Click allow. And we can check here. And here we go, it has actually printed all of the labels out correctly. So we know authentication works correctly. Okay, so now let's do something a bit more complicated, and let's write our own method for creating an email and creating and sending an email. Now, up to this point, we've basically just been using Google's code, and that is not a bad place to go from. So, just to show you, if you go to send email in the same place where the quick start guide is, it shows you some Python code you can use to create emails and create attachments with emails and send emails. And that's the code we're going to be using. I'm going to show you how to implement that code today. And the things they don't include in this code is that I found a few errors in some of the return methods, and also they don't really show you what you should be importing, like what sort of packages you should import, which is a bit irritating because it means that you have to kind of work it out yourself. But I'll be showing you all that just in a minute. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to create our own class. So that's another file, add new item, and we're going to call this class, or call this module, send underscore email. And we're just going to add that. And we're pretty much going to be using the same imports, apart from a few we're going to have to add. So we're going to use these imports plus a few more. So some imports, other imports you're going to need are, you're going to need to import base64 for encoding the email, and you're going to need to import a load of these Mime ones. So Mime Text, which you have to import the Mime Text module, pretty much all of those. And if you didn't know where to find them, then you'd have to Google it. But this tutorial should show you, where they are. So you can see right here, we have the text Mime and the audio Mime, and this is basically going to allow you to process the data that you upload in a different way. And that's the whole idea behind Mime, being able to process it in different ways based on its format. Okay, we've almost done here. And now let us import the base Mime. And we're going to import Mime base. Okay, so now we've imported Mime base. The last thing we need to import, nearly done, is Mime types. Okay, so now we've imported all the new stuff we're going to need. Let's start by forming an init function for a class. So let's do class send underscore email def underscore underscore init, and have the self there, and we're going to need the service. Now, what is a service? Service is what I showed you before. It's basically the variable that allows you to run all the commands you sent to the Gmail API. So let's go about doing that by setting up a self.service variable so we can access it within the class. And let's set up another function that we're going to call create message, and I'm pretty much going to take Google's code here. Pretty much just going to take this and stick it in here, and we're going to obviously have another layer of indentation, and we don't really need all this comment section. This is just what Google specifies to help people understand what they've done. Okay, so this is Google's code, and I had a bit of an issue with this part of code here, whereas when you run this section here for creating a message, it didn't actually work. And I found you actually have to replace with, rather than as string, but as bytes. And when you change it to as bytes, it all works fine. So that's just a little note there. So now let's do the next section, which is creating a message with attachments. And this is also done quite nicely here. You can pretty much just take this. There's no need to write code that's already been done quite well. Some of these do have bugs in, but if someone's already written it, then you'd be better off using Google's code, because they're probably going to know how to implement their own code best. Okay, and let us do an outer layer indentation. There we go, and separate that. And we're going to have to remember to add the self in after all these sections. I don't really need this comment section, gets a bit in the way. Okay, so a few things to note. There's a few things that I had to change in this section as well. The final return method also had an error that I found didn't work, and after doing a bit of Googling and looking online, I found that people had solved it by replacing as bytes, and then after doing that, they actually had to do a dot decode at the end to convert it back into. After doing that, they had to do a dot decode at the end to convert it back into base64 in basic plain text without any encodings. Okay, so that pretty much should work now. Let's just go through and understand what the code does. So here, it just defines the sender and who the email is going to, the recipient, the subject, and obviously the body or the text that you're sending the message. And then it just returns it as bytes, and then that can be sent by another method. When you're using an attachment, you have to use a multi-part, because most emails are made up of essentially either 2 parts or 1 part. A 1-part email is just when you have a body, and a 2-part email is normally when you have a body and an attachment. And the body can have like HTML, plain text, and then the attachment can have, various attachments, various files, images, etc. And you normally have an extra part for each attachment that you add. And you can see here what it's trying to do in this code is it goes through, does the same method as it did for the creating a message without an attachment. It basically does this as a part and attaches it. But obviously what we want to do here is we want to identify what file we're going to be attaching. So we can apply the right mime method. So we can treat the file correctly. So Google sometimes shows icons for particular file types. Let's say it was an image, it would show a little icon of that image. So that's just an example that you can use. And here is when it adds the header. It basically adds the attachment name so it can be displayed on the email, and then it finally attaches the attachment to the main body of the email. So that should pretty much work now. And the last thing we have to remember to do is to get the code that sends the message. So you just pretty much take this code here where it says sending messages, and this is the way they want you to send messages. Normally I find it's best to use pre-written Google code, then to try and write your own implementation, because Google normally gets the implementation of their code correct, and they're much more likely to be able to do it better than you can, just because they wrote the library. Okay, so let's remember to add the self variable in here, and there's a few errors. This seems to be Python 2 code here, which is a bit irritating, but we can easily adjust this. You can pretty much just take brackets here and some brackets here, and here you can't really do comma dot error. This isn't allowed. Even it shows it even here that it's not allowed in Python 3.x or 3. Anything above 2. If you do it like that though, it should work, and obviously you need the parentheses, so you have to add an as, and the as basically says take whatever the error is and define it as the variable error. Okay, so now we've pretty much set that up. Let's have a little look at the main method and how we're going to implement it. So we're pretty much going to import send underscore email, and we're going to set up an instance send underscore email. We could set up an instance called send inst, which just sends emails, and we'll do send underscore email dot send, and then we enter the service, which is what's going to allow us to do the commands to the server, and then we set up a message. We need to create a message, and we can actually use the send instance of the class to create this message. So we're literally just going to do send dot create underscore message underscore with underscore attachment. Okay, now I'm going to be using my test email, test17291729@gmail.com, and I'm going to send the email to myself. And obviously that means I have the recipient the same as the sender. So if you're doing any testing, it's a good way of testing it, just sending it to yourself. And obviously this is only going to work for Gmail accounts, so you can only have the sender as a Gmail account, obviously, and unless so it has to be at least run by Google, but obviously the recipient can be anyone, any Google, any service. Right, I'm going to set the body text now. So I've done the subject as testing 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to write the body as hi there. This is a test from Python, and I'm just going to include a file name. I'm just going to include a file name that I'm going to be sending. So let's just find a file name. So I think I'm just going to get an image offline to send. So let's just type in landscape, and I'll just take this image here, download it, and I'm just going to drag it into our directory. And I think I'm just going to rename it image.png just to make it easier, less typing. And I'm now going to input the file name right here, .jpg. So this is kind of a rough way of formulating an email, a very basic email. And we're creating with an attachment, but we could obviously create it just as a message on itself without an attachment, so it'd only be one part. Okay, so now we're going to use the send instance that we just created using some of Google's code to send the email. So send message, and we have to use the user ID here, because if you go back to our method, it asks for the user ID, and it also asks for the service. I think we're going to remove that, and we'll replace the service here with self.service. Anywhere where it runs the service, we want to replace with self.service. And the only place it runs that is there. Okay, and it's important noting that we need the user ID to be inputted here, and the user ID is just which user we're authenticating for, and we normally would use me, and this is the message object. So this is going to be as me, and the next variable is just going to be the message object that we've just created. So now let us run this, and we're going to actually need to change our authentication, because sending an email is much greater than a permission of just reading emails. So it might be easier just to delete the credentials and re-authenticate with a higher level. And I'm going to be using the highest level, and the highest level is actually mail.google.com, like that. That gives you full access. So now when we run that, it's going to ask us to re-authenticate as it is. Click on our relevant email, click allow, and we see we get this error, and that error is because we have not imported multi-part, which we should have imported for this to work. So I'll just quickly import that, and this is what I mean by Google doesn't really tell you what you need to import, so you have to kind of go through and check what you need to import. So if I click continue, it'll say error, you didn't tell us what you need to import. So we just run that again. I've added it in there. If you're interested, that's how you do it. And we're just going to click run. Now hopefully it will return a message ID. So it says it's returned a message ID, which means the email was successfully sent. If we go to our email account, click refresh, you can see, hi there, this is a test from Python. And you can see here, we've got our little image, and it's saying something about reporting for phishing, but this is because I send it through the API, so it's just a bit suspicious. And there's our subject. So yeah, we've managed to successfully send an email using the Gmail API. So I hope you guys have found this a helpful tutorial and help you get started with the Gmail API. And I went through some of the pitfalls that Google had left in there by having some bugs in their code. If you have any questions about this at all, and if you want the code that I've done this video, that's going to be on GitHub, and you can access that there. I'll put links in the description. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you can get the next video in this series about how to get emails using the Gmail API. Also, comment any questions about other APIs you're interested in that you want me to do videos about, and I'll be sure to look into those and possibly do a tutorial on those. Anyway, thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.